Welcome to the Alchemy for Authors podcast. I'm your host, Jo Buer. If you're an author, aspiring author, writer, or wordsmith, you're in the right place. Join me every week as I chat with authors and industry professionals and share my own experiences about using manifestation and mindset practices to supercharge our writing lives. We'll explore ways to overcome writer's block and imposter syndrome. We'll find motivation and inspiration to get our butts in the chair and our stories written. And most importantly, we'll embark on creating lives and livings doing what we love. If you've ever dreamt of a prolific, wealthy, happy or healthy author career or writing practice, then this show is for you. So let's dive into Alchemy for Authors. Hello, my friends. Thank you for joining me again. This week, I'm chatting with a wonderful children's book author, Marie Robert. If you've ever considered self-publishing a children's book or publishing in multiple languages, then I think you'll enjoy today's show. Marie talks about her journey to publish her book, tips for publishing in more than one language, and considerations for marketing when it comes to children's books. I always find that regardless of the genre, there is so much to learn from the writing and publication journeys of others, so I really hope you enjoy this episode. When you're ready, grab a drink, find a comfy chair, sit back, and enjoy the show. Hello, my lovelies. Welcome back to another episode of Alchemy for Authors. So today I'm chatting with author Marie Robert. Marie is an Irish speech and language pathologist and children's author. Marie loves to travel and has moved around a lot. After living in Singapore for many years, she finally settled in Paris, where she currently lives with her husband and 3 daughters. In her day job, Marie is passionate about improving the lives of children with language disorders, and she's a firm advocate for bilingualism. Her children's book, George's Faraway Family, can be purchased in either French or English and is for ages 3 to 7. So welcome to the show, Marie. I'm so happy to have you join me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
I would love if we could dive in and you could share a little bit about your author journey and what led you to write children's books.
Yeah, so as you gave in my nice, lovely introduction, I'm a speech and language pathologist by trade. I'm a pediatric specialist, so I spend a lot of time around children, and I have 3 daughters. And I've always written, when I was younger, I wrote like angsty poetry, and as I got older, I wrote essays, and I always enjoyed that. And then when I had children, I wrote little stories for the children, but I sort of wrote them on my computer, read them to the children, and then kind of put them away and did nothing else with them. But I've always kind of had this little idea in the back of my head that it would be nice to do something with that and to sort of explore that. One day I wrote a little story which was called something else at the time, but later turned into George's Faraway Family. And I read it to my 2 elder daughters, and they loved it. And they loved it because it was a little bit like them and things like that. So I'll get into the story later. But it kind of set off this little spark that like, oh, maybe this is the one that I'll do something with. And I think a lot of people have like a mentor or someone they look up to, and a friend or an acquaintance at the time who is now a good friend was self-publishing a children's book at the time. So I had kind of been going through that process with her and loving listening to the process and how she was getting on and things like that. And once I saw that she could do it and her book turned out beautiful, and I was like, oh, if she can do it, maybe I can do it. That's kind of what happened then. And then quite quickly then, in the space of about 6 months, because the story was already sort of written, I kind of just dove right into learning about the laws and things, because I'm in France. They're very strict about children's literature and laws governing it and things like that. So there was a very big, steep learning curve, as well as all the other things I had to do. Yeah, so I just dove right in, and it was a really exciting adventure, and I'm really enjoying the aftermath also.
Wonderful. That's really cool, because your book only came out earlier this year. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I suppose it was sort of probably available so early May. I'm kind of just at the start of the promotional journey.
I think writing a book, your first book, is so amazing because it proves to you what you're capable of. It's such a good feeling knowing that you've brought something like that to completion, which is really cool. I'm really interested just by something that you said, that the laws in France governing children's writing are quite strict. What do you mean by that? Can you give a few examples?
It's that you have to be really carefully registered and things like that. So you can't just write anything and publish it whatever you want, even if it's self-published. So there's quite careful wording that you have to use in the copyright sections. There's also copyright libraries here, so you are obliged to send anything that is edited or written in France, or even abroad that will be sold in France, has to be sent to the Copyright Library or the National Library of France. Yeah, and all sorts of things. And there's a couple of laws governing like how they can be published, and even rules about pricing. They're really, really strict. You must have the price printed on your book, and no retailer can charge any more than that. The like registration of things like that is really, really strict here.
That is really interesting because when I think about indie publishing, one of the things that appeals to me about it is that you've got the control over things like pricing and that. So generally, you can raise or lower your price as you like. But with a children's book, I see that you do have it available for ebook, but is probably, am I right in assuming it's better sold in the
Yeah,
physical
there's
format?
like no market for that, but because you can do it at the same time, I think a lot of people do, but I think we all sort of know that there's very little market for that. So yeah, I mean, you certainly have the control, that remains with you. You set your price, but because it has to be built into your actual cover, so afterwards you cannot change it without reprinting the book, and that's to protect the consumer, so that you can't just up the price anytime you feel like it. There's also laws about like there's a really low VAT to encourage people to read. There's a really low VAT on books in France. So again, same thing, that kind of takes into account that big bookshops that would be selling it are responsible for the VAT, but that is included into the price of the book. So they cannot charge anything other than the price that's printed on the book.
Wow, that's so interesting. I guess in my narrow little world, I tend not to think about what it's like in other countries and that and all these kind of rules and things that come into play because my books are primarily, I guess, so I'm in New Zealand and so they sell here, but they sell in the US quite a bit, the UK, Australia, Canada. Those tend to be my big areas of where I sell. And so far, it's been pretty straightforward with things, which is good. But then also, I primarily sell ebooks. So there's a bit of a difference, I
Yeah,
guess.
so I guess the market is kind of different. But yeah, I mean, I guess it really would if I mean, I'm Irish by birth. I suppose if I was doing it in Ireland, the laws would be different. It was just I was lucky that I had this friend of mine who was also kind of going through it, so I had some heads up to she could show me where I needed to like read up. You need to go and read this just to make sure that you're within all the laws here. So she could kind of point you in the right direction. So I really appreciated that.
That's awesome. So I've read a little bit about your story behind writing this children's book and you yourself being Irish but living in Paris. But can you tell our listeners a little bit more about the idea behind your story and what your story is about?
Absolutely. So I'm what you might call a diplomatic child. So I grew up moving around. My father worked for the Irish Embassy, still does, and for the Irish Embassy or the Irish Foreign Service. So we moved around a lot. I changed house and school and country every couple of years. My brother and sister kept going. Then after I stayed in Ireland when I was 18 to go to university. And then after that, as soon as I got my degree, I left again. And I went to work in Singapore for nearly 10 years in a big hospital there. I met my husband, who is French, and I had my first two children in Singapore. So that's complicated enough for you. But as I said, my husband is French and we were very, very far away. And we finally decided we would probably move back to Europe. And I had my last child here. So Georgia's faraway family is about a little girl who doesn't live in the same place as her extended family. So her grandparents, her aunties, her uncles, her cousins, they all live in different countries and they live in a different country from her. And I specifically didn't give Georgia a country. So she doesn't have a nationality. She doesn't have a country that she lives in. So she could be either living in her own home country and the family are away, or she could be like me living somewhere else, or like my own daughters, because they have grown up like that as well, living with somewhere where the family is far away. And the idea was to give a little bit of representation because I guess most children that you meet, they do have their grandparents close to them, or their aunties and uncles, and they see them very often. But I didn't as a child. And my children don't see one side of the family very often. And I know a lot of countries are very big, so there are certainly people where it's a bit different. But the idea was to give a little bit of representation. So Georgia, who's the character of the book, has her family members living in different countries, and she doesn't see them very often, and that makes her kind of sad sometimes. And I know I certainly was sort of sad about that, and sometimes when I was kind of young, and my children often say, can we go and see the Irish side of the family? And I'm like, that's a long way away. I remember feeling like that. And Georgia then has to do a project in school about her family, and she has to make a family tree. And she adjusts the family tree to include all the different countries.
Oh.
And her peers in school think that kind of cool, and they've never, their families aren't like that. So in the end, actually, the other children say, oh, that's quite cool, actually. And she kind of has this sort of moment of like acceptance. And when she goes to bed, then she's like, oh, actually, you're still just a family. And it doesn't change the fact that all the family members love each other, just the fact we don't see each other very often. And it was kind of, like I said, to give representation to kids like mine. And there are so many kids like that now because the world is much smaller than it was when I was young. So that was kind of the story behind it. And then I really gave myself a headache because I decided we're a bilingual family and we operate in 2 languages. I live in France, even though obviously my mother tongue is English. So I decided I was going to publish it in both of our languages to have it available for all the children, like mine in our country and outside. So that was the aim.
That is fantastic. And I think that type of book, the idea behind it is so relevant. I don't have kids, but I have 2 nephews that spent their first 7 years or so in Austria. So I didn't really get to see them. It's a little bit far from New Zealand. They've moved to New Zealand, but now they're moving to the other end of New Zealand. So, I've had a year of them being relatively close and then they're moving away. But for them too, it means that they've had their Austrian grandparents close for a good portion of their life. And now they're quite far away and they've got their New Zealand Kiwi grandparents here now. And so it's quite relevant.
Yeah. And again, my nephews are like that. I don't see them very often either. And it's just the world is so cosmopolitan now, so global now, that families like that where, okay, mine is particularly spaced out. All my family live in different countries. That's particularly unusual. But to have somebody who lives far away is actually quite common for kids now. And it was just really, really important to me. Like I said, it might seem sort of a funny idea to give representation to that, but that was important to me.
I think that's amazing. And also that you didn't give Georgia a nationality, which means that she could be anybody.
Right. And there's nothing, like I said, to say where she lives. There's no identifying pictures for her. Now, there are identifying pictures because the other family members, I did give them locations and that it didn't really matter. They could be anywhere. But I did give the other family members locations so that they would have pictures that would represent that. But for her, yeah, like I said, the idea was to be, she could be global. She could be you, she could be your child. And that was the aim. So that as many children as possible could see themselves like Georgia.
That's cool. Oh, I love that. So can you talk a little bit more about what it was like then to publish your children's book into languages? Like, how did you go about it? Were you the one that translated it into French as well?
So yeah, that was also quite complicated. I did actually translate it myself, but I'm not foolhardy enough to think that that was going to be sufficient. So I translated it first, and then I had it read by a proper and official translator, both the English version and then my translated version. So she edited the translated version that I had written. So it was translated and that was fine. So we changed some names that didn't work as well, things like that. We also had to change the title because it just didn't work at all in French. And I couldn't get one that would get close. So in the end, we had to change it to the French title, which is Georgia et sa famille autour du monde. So Georgia and her family around the world. It's not exactly the same thing.
No.
But it just didn't work. And no matter what I did, it sounded weird.
Yeah.
So we sort of worked on things like that. And like I said, some of the names needed to be changed and things like that. So we did that. And then I kind of thought I was good to go. And I was like, okay, great, I'm done. And then I had a few other people read it. And they were like, yeah, something is weird about this. What do you mean it's weird? It's perfect. It makes sense. It's grammatically correct. Like, what's wrong with it? And they were like, yeah, some of the tenses are a bit weird. So I realized then that the French in particular have a thing about story tenses that does not at all translate directly from English. Because they use what's called the passé simple, which is a different type of past tense from the one that I had translated the book into and the one that this translator had used as well. And it is only used in recounting stories and only used in print. It's never used in speech.
Oh.
So I suddenly found myself with this enormous headache where part of the book had to be rewritten because the imperative past tense did not work anymore. So then I roped in some more help, got a few other people to help me out and translated again parts or changed the tenses in like certain passages. So it's not that long, but it was a lot of work. Yeah, to get it so that it sort of flowed correctly because it wasn't wrong before. There was just something that sort of sent bells ringing off in the native speakers' heads that I just didn't really have, even though it was correct. So it was really, really interesting. And the French turn of phrase is exceptionally beautiful. So it's actually more poetic in French than it is in English because they use very flowery language with children's books, quite complicated language. And they use words that I wouldn't actually have written in a children's book, but they do. So I ended up really loving the French version and found it, like I said, almost a little bit more poetic than the English one. But yeah, it was really interesting.
That is so interesting. It's just made me think about things so differently. I've had another children's book author on this podcast, and she's based in the US. And so she wrote it in English. And she was talking about how you have to make sure that your language is really concise and to that readership. So hers was a picture book for, I think, 3 to 5 year olds. And so it had to be understood for that age group. And then listening to you and hearing that in French, it's a little bit more flowery and a little bit more, sounds like almost a little bit more sophisticated for what we would maybe consider for that age group.
Yeah, I think they have a very big gap between what we would consider to be like a baby's book
Yeah.
and then the ones that have stories. And the ones that have stories start almost straight away. You have this tiny subsection for, like Chubby's first day in school and that kind of thing. And those are those really simple ones, the procedural narrative. But as soon as you get into like real narrative, yeah, I've always been impressed actually by the way French children's literature does that. And it would, like I said, it was an entirely new learning curve for me having to write that. And like I said, I wound up needing some help,
Yeah.
which I very happily accepted. It was really interesting. And I loved vocabulary choices and I loved finding the right phrase. And I had people being like, yeah, this one is okay, but, and they would suggest a different one. So I ran it through a few people sort of to get it right. I hope it is right now.
Yeah. Well, that sounds absolutely beautiful. That sounds really great. So it sounds like you had quite a team around you, or you needed to pull from the help of a lot of people around you all the way through this. A mentor of a person who had already published children's books, and then you've got a translator, and then you'd called on other people as well just to read through. Can you talk a little bit about your kind of team or the people that helped you with it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I didn't have much professional help. I mean, my friend who had already been through this was certainly extremely helpful. The professional translator was a useful experience, and that was obviously something professional that I paid for. But the rest were really, really nice volunteers. My family-in-law checked it through. My mother-in-law is an exceptionally good copy editor because the French of a certain age are unbelievably meticulous when it comes to grammar because I had it absolutely beaten into them with a steel rod. So her spelling and grammar are fabulous, despite the fact that she was raised on a farm. So she's a great copy editor. She helped a lot. My husband was the one who originally flagged the thing. He's like, yeah, I get it, but this is weird. And then I ran it by some friends who happened to be particularly literary. I did the same thing for, I have a friend a very good friend of mine who worked for a short period of time in a publishing house in Ireland. She looked at it for me and she also had an English creative writing degree as well. So she, looked at it. But these were friends who were kind of doing me a favor, which I really, really appreciated. But yeah, there was a lot of people that it went through before I was sort of happy with it. Or before I kind of felt like, all right, like I can't touch this anymore because any more I do to it, I'm just going to make it worse.
Yeah.
I guess there's no perfect, but like this is good. And if I keep going, I'm just going to ruin it. So it certainly went through a lot of people's hands.
That's wonderful. I think that's really an important thing because I think people starting on this journey of writing books and that don't realize actually how many people it kind of takes to write a book. So as an author, we do the main bulk of the work, but then we need to seek out cover designers or illustrators or editors or family or friends or anybody else to sometimes read through and check over or be beta readers or anything like that, just to make sure that it's the best product at the end of it.
And there's nothing more valuable than a fresh set of eyes. Kind of one of those things like before, but I certainly had that reinforced many times over the process. And even the formatting process, you're like, how in the name of God did that one spell mistake get through? Like it's been read 1,000 times, but the fresh set of eyes, just really, really important. And I kind of had to do it twice because I did the two completely separate versions because of the language thing. So it was looked at a lot.
Yeah. And so I've seen the cover of your book and it's beautifully illustrated, like it's a beautiful cover. So how did you go about finding an illustrator and what was that process like?
So that was also a really exciting adventure. It's a part of the process that I absolutely adored. but also didn't really see coming because I knew nothing about nothing. I basically knew I needed an illustrator, but I mean, I'm artistic literary way, but I am not at all artistic. So I had no idea of what I wanted this to look like. But I knew what style I didn't like. So I
Mm.
basically trawled through hundreds and hundreds of proper artist profiles, real illustrators, people who have done this before. Some of them are book illustrators, some of them make posters and all that kind of stuff to try and find a few people that I thought, you know what, maybe you could do this for me. Of course, you end up contacting them, you check their price. It's extremely expensive, as it should be because it's extremely detailed. And you need somebody, in my case, because I couldn't format the book myself, because this is the first time I'm doing this, I was not willing to. Now, that would have been biting off way more than I could chew. So I also needed somebody who would be able to help me with the formatting in several forms because it's hardback, paperback, and ebook in two different languages. So there was all sorts of sort of constraints. And I ended up finding this woman, whose name is Mariam. And from the first email I sent her, we realized that she has a faraway family too.
Ah,
And I just loved that. She's Iranian. She currently lives in Canada and she moved around a lot as well, including a short stint in France as well. She even speaks rudimentary French. And the fact, and her husband is from somewhere else as well, like they've moved around. It was just awesome. And she was, as soon as she read the blurb for the project, she's like, I'm so into this because it's my story as well. And she was just wonderful. She was a wonderful person to work with. We went back and forth a lot. But I bet she said, like, what do you want this to look like? I was like, I have no idea. Please tell me. So she did all the drawings for me and she was like, this is how I see it. And I loved almost all of it straight away. I think I had like one page. I'm like, this is the only page I want to like redo. The rest was sort of small details. There were some things I wanted to include specifically. There's a little boy who wears hearing aids in all the class scenes because, speech and language therapy. So I was like, how can I get that in there somewhere? Some kind of little diversity, my little shout out, my work. But even things like I didn't like the color of her hair to begin with. I didn't like the color of George's hair. And I was like, we need to change her hair color. But yeah, and she was just really wonderful. She was very gentle. She was very available in terms because we were on two different time schedules. So, we would meet, once a week or once in 2 weeks to check the colors. And like I said from the start, I loved her style. It's very soft. I didn't want anything that looked cartoony, or a lot of books I think now are often especially aimed at young children. So mine kind of straddles 3 to 7.
Yeah.
So the ones aimed at the younger children are often very like fluid colors, and that's very much the style. And I just didn't see it like that in my head. And hers is very soft, very gentle, and it just worked really well. And like I said, she was an absolute joy to work with. So I mean, that was lucky for me.
Yeah, but it's amazing sometimes, I think, when we have these kind of heart projects or projects that really come from our heart, it's amazing how the right people seem to come to us. We seem to stumble across the right people who are just going to help us on that journey. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it's funny. And Mariam and I talked about that. We still text each other sometimes just because, we've never met or anything.
Yeah.
So we kind of were talking about it sometimes being like, that this seems to be sort of fortuitous that this has happened like that. So yeah, it was a really exciting part of the project. And especially our children's book, it's not pleasing to the eye. You will get nowhere, no matter how good the story is. So it is really important. And I think indie publishers, because our aim, I know when we go is like, can we even break even on this? That kind of thing. But for children's book authors, the gap between breaking even and that is even farther because good illustrations are extremely expensive. But it's kind of one of those things like if you want it to be out there and you want it to be appealing, that kind of is the way to go. So, there's this kind of pulling back and forth being like, am I going to do this? But in the end, I just decided like, if I'm going to do it, I should do it. And like I said, I really do love the pictures. I love them from the start and I love them. And I have to say, everybody so far who has seen the pictures absolutely adores them. And I've had lots of comments to say that they're really, really good. So I'm really happy about that because it helps the book stay in people's minds. It helps the children remember the little details and things like that. So that was really important to me.
Yeah, like I said, the cover looks just absolutely beautiful. Beautiful. So do you have
Thank you.
plans then to write more children's books, to do this whole process over again?
So I would really love to do this whole process over again, but I have to get rid of the books in my salon first. Otherwise, my husband will kill me. I would really love to do this again, all joking aside. And I have some other stuff that I would really love to do, but I certainly would not want to do it too quickly because I want to give Georgia the time that it needs to get out there. And I'm new to the whole marketing business. I don't really naturally do that. I'm a medical professional. I don't have to sell my services. So this is new, but I'm enjoying it in some sense, but it's certainly a lot of work. And I have
Mm.
also a job and 3 kids as well. I definitely would do it again, but there are some stipulations that I need to do first. I'm going to give Georgia, I've given myself 2 years to kind of do this, and then we'll see. And if I get to that point where, okay, you know what, all the Georgia books are gone and it's just out in the world doing its thing, yeah, I definitely would love to do this again. And I'd learned some stuff too, so maybe I would even do it better.
That's cool. That's wonderful. So I have to ask this. So you are indie published, but why indie publishing? Like, was this your plan from the beginning, or did you want to go traditional at any point?
So I did not have a plan about this at all. There was no plan. Actually, like I said, I kind of just sort of followed in the footsteps of this friend of mine that was already doing it. And also, I did kind of want to do this quickly. I'm also well aware that the book, it's niche in its own sense. Now, it would work for everybody. I mean, it's a children's book. It's beautiful. I hope all children would love it. But I wondered whether I might have a hard job of selling it to a literary agent. The children's market is, I mean, possibly even more saturated than the adult market.
Mm.
In terms of trying to get a literary agent, you certainly can't just go banging down publishing houses' doors because they won't talk to you. So I don't necessarily think I made like a very conscious decision about it. It was just kind of one of those things. Either I sit on this for 10 years and bang down the door of hundreds of literary agents until someone picks it up, or I just do it. And like I said, I'm lucky enough that I could just do it. And I had this little mentor of mine who was fabulous, and she was doing it that way. Like she had looked into the other options, and it kind of come to the same conclusion that if we're going to do it, we can just do it and do it our way. But I mean, I certainly wouldn't close the door on doing a different book with a publishing house. I mean, that would be awesome. But I find access to those kind of things really, really difficult. And you
Mm.
have to already have an agent before you can get an agent, if you know what I mean. And like I said, I'm kind of time short. I do work and have children and have a whole other life and have a wonderful husband that is, also takes up time. So it was kind of one of those things like, look, this is probably the most efficient way I can do this. And I'm lucky enough to have the resources to do it. So I just did it.
That's
I
wonderful.
just jumped off the edge there.
That's great. I can completely relate to that. And I think a lot of indie authors do too. When we get really passionate about a project, we just want it done. And that is an unfortunate thing with being traditionally published, is that it can be a very drawn out process. So if you're lucky enough to get the agent and get the publisher, and then it takes a really long time to go through that whole process of the editing, the formatting, the
Yeah,
cover design, when it's finally going to be released. Whereas when you're indie published, you've got so much more control and you can do it to your own timeline. So if you want to publish sooner, you
yeah.
can. Yeah.
I do actually have a friend who is traditionally published here in France. So I obviously spoke to her. She has 2 children's. She's many, many things. This wonderful woman, but she does have 2 traditionally published children's books as well. So I did talk to her as well, and because again, the nature of sort of the children's market, in the end, she said like I did this and it was supported all the way and it was great and whatever. But then they did no. I mean, it was worth nothing to them nearly. She's like, they did no marketing, none,
Mm.
except that's supposed to be part of the contract. So I did all the marketing, and and I went on TV and I was asked to talk about it, but I found all that myself, so they didn't do it. And I was like, oh yeah, that's really interesting. So I agree. I mean, there's so many wonderful things about traditional publishing. Certainly, the fact that it doesn't cost you anything up front,
Mm.
the main thing that's amazing, particularly for children's books, because again,
Yeah.
like I said, the illustrations are then at the charge of the publishing house, and that's really wonderful. But yeah, in the end, it came down to being like, with my story, and this way, like you said, it was kind of a hard project as well as something else. I hope it will turn out to be something else as well, but it definitely was the way to go, I think, for me in this instance. But yeah, I mean, I would try and do it both ways if I could at a later date. I mean, that would be really interesting also.
Yeah, for sure. So how are you going about marketing your book at the moment?
I have 100 copies anyway, which is really good. I had a sort of, publicity thing just before went out. People bought copies in advance, which then once I got them, I sent them all out. So that was really nice. People post about it, so there's a hashtag and people look at it. But I think probably the main, I also went down to my local bookstore. My local bookstore here holds both versions, but obviously principally the French version. The rest, I think, will probably take place starting in September because obviously international schools and things like that will be a big market for this kind of book and bilingual schools. And I do live in near Paris. So I intend to do that. But unfortunately, I mean, the timing on that one wasn't great because the school is over now. Really, there would be no interest in things like that at the moment. So I'll probably start again in September. I'm hoping to do that, to go and speak at schools and hopefully have schools buy the book. That will be the aim, and for the bilingual schools for them to buy both versions. And apart from that, I haven't really done much else simply because I'm still trying to work out what the best thing to do is. So I'm not necessarily sit on it. I definitely will be doing sort of passive marketing during the summer.
Yeah.
But word of mouth for things like this is actually the best thing you can do because, there's ads and stuff you can pay for, but they generate almost nothing for people like us, like in terms of the children's market. So actually, word of mouth from parent to parent is actually the best thing that you get for children's books. So I will be doing more of that. And like I said, anyone who buys the book, it would be wonderful that they go and tell another parent. If they like it, go and tell another parent about it. Post it on your Facebook. Just tell somebody about it because that's actually the best thing that people can do for indie kid lit authors. Yes. If you enjoyed it, if your children enjoyed it, and this goes for my book and everyone else's book, any indie published children's book, tell your friends about it. Tell your kids' teachers about it. Tell anybody who's connected with children about it because that's really the best thing that people can do. I've learned that in quite a short period of time. So I guess I need to work on that. That's why I said I'm not ready to let Georgia go and do something else yet. I need to put some time and effort into this, but it's a matter of finding the time.
Yeah, I love the concept of word of mouth. I think that is so, so important, but also connecting with schools in that. Do you already find that a little bit easier because of the nature of your job? Because I'd assume with your job, you're working with schools all the time, so you might already have some connections.
So actually, no, that's to do with the French health service. So I am registered. France is a social state nearly. So most care here is at least heavily subsidized by the government, which means that we don't have like a private service, but it also means that we're not connected to the education service either. So actually, no, I'm connected to my patients all through my door, but the schools for people like me who are registered on the health service, and I'm a bilingual therapist, I'm licensed to treat in both languages, whereas most people with Anglophone degrees are actually not licensed to treat here on the state service because you have to be Francophone. It's really very complicated to get through all the paperwork for that. So I managed to do it. But yeah, it's to do with the sort of separation of the services. So I have yet to get my foot properly in that door.
Wow. Yeah, that's really different. That's really interesting because I know in a lot of other countries, speech pathologists and that quite often go into schools. So yeah, that is quite different.
Yeah, we for the most part don't. And like I said, it's really to do with who's covering care. So there's many amazing things about that, which we are not here to talk about. But it means that people really go and seek treatment because, they know they're going to be reimbursed for it. So it's really, really important in terms of that kind of thing. But it makes us very separate from the educational system itself because that's a totally different system.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm wishing you all the best of luck for when you do go into schools. Yeah. And so you're looking at also doing some talks at schools if possible, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I've actually been asked as well, because I do have a rather international connection. I've been asked to give a talk in an international school in Lithuania because I have some connections there. So that's an English speaking school with obviously a lot of children who are not Lithuanians, so they do that. A lot of schools have authors' days and things like that. So I'm hoping that would be something that I can do. And now that the world is so small, we can use Zoom for that. So that's going to be really exciting. And I hope to do some things in person as well. I mean, usually for young children, these kind of things are really, really exciting. It's sort of about word of mouth because, like I said, the children don't buy the book. So it's really about getting the foot in, being with the schools, take the copies, and then seeing what else you can do to bring the story alive, to show the children that they're represented. And like I said, there's the French language or the English language, and schools here, there are some schools that are bilingual schools, this exists everywhere. So, to do it in both languages, to show that it can be done in both languages as well, is always really interesting. So yeah, I have some connections in Singapore. I hope maybe to do that as well. So that's a very basic plan. And so, like I said, I hope to hit the ground running in September.
Yeah. And hopefully too, having your book published in 2 different languages also means that it's going to appeal to a greater market as well.
That's true. And that's a really interesting point because somebody asked me, oh, is it a bilingual book? And I was like, oh, no, hang on. It's not a bilingual book. It's the same book in two separate languages. And everyone was like, well, why didn't you just do it in two languages? And I was like, well, when you do that, what you do is take it where your market is only people who speak both of those languages.
Mm.
And for language learning, that's really exciting. But there's a very, very tiny, tiny market for that. So while it was a lot more effort to have all the different versions and all the different copies and everything like that, yeah, that was a really interesting decision, and I certainly did have to think about that in terms of the bilingualism. But yeah, obviously, I mean, the idea was, since I do have access to these two groups and I do speak the language, so I could at least control what was printed. It was important to me to do it that way. And then, of course, yeah, other people have access to it.
Yeah. So would you consider then doing it in a different language, a language you maybe weren't so familiar with, just to extend that reach even further?
I think I personally wouldn't, because the amount of time it would take me to do that would be monumental. But that friend I was talking about, she has just done hers into a third language, and this is a language she doesn't speak. So I mean, it's absolutely doable.
Yeah.
But I think for me, it would not be the right choice. It would split me in more parts than I currently can manage.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't do that. But since it's also part of my identity, like I said, I live in a bilingual family. We operate bilingually. It was really wonderful for me to be able to do that. But I think more than that, I think if you have access to a publishing house who will do that for you and have the editors who can check it, because I would be super uncomfortable if I don't understand it. What is it? I think for me, it would not be the right step. But that said, if I was traditionally published, then I would jump at that.
Yeah, fair enough. So, do you have any advice for somebody who is maybe starting out wanting to write a children's book and wanting to go the indie publishing route? What would be your advice to them?
And the main advice would be to just do your research. Like I said, I learned a lot. I would talk to people who have done it in your country or in your place, find out what it will be like beforehand, because I gained a lot in terms of knowledge and troubleshooting from speaking to my friend, because she had had a couple of screw ups and it took her longer than it took me because she didn't have someone telling her, hey, that's a really bad idea. That was invaluable to me. So I would say, find somebody who has done it and talk to them, and really talk to them. Like, we're in Paris, so you take people out for wine. So I took her out for wine twice to grill her about this process. And I think that's the best thing I did in terms of the process. But if you have a story, tell it. If you have a story, tell it. And put whatever your budget is. Don't aim for the lowest. If you have a fork budget, don't put the lowest into the pictures. If you have a top budget, that should be where they go. Because like I said, I've had a lot of feedback. And if you look on all the writing groups and you look at the Kidlit groups, it shows. So no matter how good, I'm a big believer, no matter how good the story is, if it doesn't look nice, the children won't. I mean, they might like the story, but it will find it hard to get off the shelf or off the internet site. Do your research, talk to people, and really do due diligence when it comes to the illustrations. It will save you in the long run.
That's such great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. So now I know after listening to this, people are going to want to connect to you. And if they've got kids or have kids in their family, I'm sure they're going to want to check out George's Faraway Family as well. So how can they connect with you and find your book?
I have an author page on Facebook, so you can just look up the Mary Roberts author. So you could find me. You can look up for George's Faraway Family. The book itself is available on Amazon in both languages, in paperback. I will say that the hardbacks are really, really, really nice, but they're only available from me because Amazon doesn't print hardback children's books. It doesn't print hardback children's books yet, but children's books in hardback actually sell better. So there you go. That's not a piece of advice for Kidlit people, because they're hardy and they stand up to small fingers that are not very delicate. And the printing also for those kind of things tends to be of a much higher quality. Now they're more expensive, but that's some more advice to think about. So the hardback copies are with me, and I have an email address, which perhaps you can link somewhere, but the address is maryrobertsbooks@gmail.com. So people wishing to know something about the book or me are very welcome to email me at that email address. And the book can be sent to them directly from me via that address if they want the hardback copy. And if people go for the easier version, it's obviously available on Amazon. And if you do buy it, I would love to hear what you think about it. Another really important thing to remember for indie authors is always review the book.
Yes.
Really important that people go and leave a comment. It's super hard for people to remember to do, which I absolutely understand. So yeah, if you do go check it out, tell a parent friend, tell your kid's teacher, and do feel free to contact me. I love getting feedback. I've really enjoyed that part. It's been really wonderful. So yeah, I would love to hear from anybody that's interested.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on to the show to talk about your book and to talk about the process and everything you went through. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
So here are some takeaways from today's episode. 1. When publishing a book in different languages, invest in a professional translator and ensure you have native speakers of the language as beta readers to ensure the language and tense suits the expectations of that genre. 2. Do your research around your country's requirements when self-publishing. 3. Research and be willing to invest in a quality illustrator. Illustrations are essential to the success of your children's book. 4. Children's books sell well with word of mouth. Encourage your readers to share your books with others. 5. Getting into local bookstores and schools is invaluable for marketing your children's book. Visit and do talks at schools to make sure your books are more visible. 6. Ensure your book is available as both paperback and hardcover to maximise your sales. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you publish children's books, I hope this has inspired you to consider publishing in different languages to widen your market. If you have little ones at home or know of others who do, make sure you check out Mari's books on Amazon, and you can find the links in the show notes. Now, Mari talked a lot about the importance of reviews and word of mouth, and so it would mean the world to me if you're enjoying this podcast that you leave a review and let a friend know about it. It not only makes my day, but also helps me to reach a larger audience. And if you haven't already, make sure you sign up to my Alchemy for Authors newsletter at www.subscribepage.com/manifestation for authors. In doing so, you'll be given a free PDF of tips and tricks to help you manifest your dream author life. All right, my lovelies, so I hope you have a wonderful week, and until next time, happy writing.